and today I'm going to talk about the books that I read in March and April. Just to let you know, I read 18 books in 2 months. That is quite a lot. I feel like overall I'm reading a lot more this year. I feel like I have just got such a big passion for reading lately that it is one of my favorite things to do right now. So, as always, I read a bunch of books on my Kindle, so I can't show you a lot of them, but I do have a couple of the physical copies. The first book I ended up reading in March is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. There are a bunch of books I talked about in other videos, and I'm pretty sure I talked about Red Rising, but I gave it 5 stars, and honestly, I was not expecting it to be that good. Pretty sure this is a sci-fi book, which I haven't read too much of, but I could be wrong. But I really ended up liking this one and am excited to continue reading the series. This one is about, there's like different groups in the society based on their color of their hair and their eyes, and basically your color determines your status. And so he is a red, and he wants to get rid of these status classes. He ends up joining and impersonating a different color, and it is just really, really exciting. It reminded me a little bit of the Hunger Games, but this book was so cool, and I haven't heard of anything similar. I mean, there are similar books, but I just thought the idea for this one was very, very interesting and pretty unique. Then I ended up reading Shadow Me, which is, I want to say 4.5 in the Shadow Me series. And as you know, I have been reading the Shadow Me series for months, and I only recently completed it. But at this point, the books are definitely blending together and just not sticking out as much as I used to in the beginning. But I gave it 4 stars, but with how little I remember it, I would probably give it 3 stars now. It is a novella from Kenji's perspective, I'm pretty sure. I might be wrong, but I honestly can't really remember what happens. It is starting to come back to me now. I do remember that I thought this book really explained a lot more of Kenji's character and gave him a lot more depth overall. So I did like that part. I don't really remember much happening in this book. The same situation is happening with the next book I ended up reading, which was Defy Me, which I again gave 4 stars, but honestly I would probably bring it down to 3 stars again because I cannot remember what happened. I'm pretty sure this is the 5th book, but in this one, Juliet learns a bunch of secrets that people are still keeping from her, which I remember thinking that is just so sad that through the entire series there are more and more secrets she has yet to learn, but it seems like everyone else already knows. This book was honestly, I kind of remember it was very, very high stakes, but the ending, just overall, the book felt very rushed, and a lot of high stakes things happen in such a short amount of time. It has a very interesting plot, but it was starting to feel like they kept having these same fights over and over with no resolution. By the last book, even though there was a resolution, it didn't even feel final because of how many times they had already gone through very similar conflicts. There wasn't very much accomplished in each book. It was just starting to get a little repetitive. Then I ended up reading Skyshade by Alex Astor, which is the 3rd book in the Lightlark series. And I also gave this book 4 stars. When I was reading it, I ended up really liking the book, but I seriously cannot remember how it ends, which is not the best sign to me. But I do think that in each book, the author does such a great job of making you really, really like the love interest in that book. And by the end of the 3rd book, I was totally unsure of who I should be rooting for because each book really made you like each character. And it got a little confusing because I didn't know who I wanted to end up with the female main character. But in this book, there is like an oracle that said she was going to choose a character, and it is kind of the same thing. Nothing really gets resolved, but it was a very fun ride. There are parts of the book that I do remember, and I did end up really enjoying those parts. I do wish that we had just come to a conclusion in the third book. It didn't really feel like she chose a character, a love interest, and also the problems didn't really seem like they were resolved either. So overall, this series, I hardly remember a lot of either of the books, and there were plenty of parts where I was like, who is this character and what is happening, because I just seriously could not remember what happened in the previous two books. For me, they are just not very memorable, but they are seriously a good time when reading them. They are the type of books I would pick up if I was having trouble reading and I was in a reading slump. I liked the book, but I didn't love it and can't really remember what happened. Next, I ended up reading Reveal Me, which is 5.5 in the Shatter Me series, and I gave it 4 stars, but again, I'd probably push it down to 3 for the same reason. I remember Kenji was the narrator, but I did really like how Kenji and another character end up getting to know each other a lot more. I did think it was very cute and a nice refresher from Juliet and Warner, because it's nice to see side characters getting a little bit more, not screen time, but I mean screen time. I ended up liking this novella a lot, and it does stick out to me a little bit more than the others. So then the last book I read in March was, of course, Sunrise on the Reaping, which I did give 5 stars, which was no surprise to me. I love the Hunger Games series. Probably like this one the best out of all of the books, except maybe Catching Fire. For some reason, Catching Fire has always been my favorite. I just really love that one. But this one might be my new favorite. You're probably already familiar, but it is about Haymitch's game, and I talked about it in other videos, but I thought there was a lot of connections between Katniss and Haymitch. And overall, Haymitch's story was way more heartbreaking than I expected. It really makes you understand Haymitch a lot more, and I really thought his games were probably the most interesting and high stakes out of all of the other Hunger Games books. So, I'm not sure if I said it, but I only read 6 books in March and 12 books in April, so I ended up reading a lot more in April than I thought I would, but I probably would credit that to my TBR and trying to get through it. In the beginning of the month, I didn't really prioritize my TBR, so I started out with a couple of Kindle books. But the first book I read in April was Story of My Life by Lucy Score, which I gave 4 stars. I thought it was super cute. It's about an author, and she goes to a new town to find inspiration, and she finds a community, a love interest, and just really turns her life around. It was super, super cute, a little bit cringy at times, but the plot was really adorable. I did think it was a cute, lighthearted read, and I unexpectedly really liked it. I talked about it more in another video, so if you're curious on a more in-depth review, I would look at those. All of my TBR books are in different videos. I'm just kind of gonna skim through those ones. But I ended up finishing the main books in the Shatter Me series, and I read Imagine Me, and I gave it 3 stars because the resolution to the main conflict just felt so rushed and honestly not very impactful. Like I said earlier in this video, I really think that because the same few conflicts were just repeating over and over, it started to feel like at the end of Imagine Me, I wasn't really sure there would be a resolution because of how many books there were in the series. Finally, the conflict is resolved for real this time, and then I ended up reading Quicksilver, which I gave 5 stars. This book is by Callie Hart, and I really, really like this series, but I did not know going into it that there was going to be a second book, which is not out yet, and that is honestly super disappointing. So if you are not a fan of cliffhangers, I really would not recommend reading a series that has not finished yet, because I did not expect to love the characters as much as I did. So the fact that it ended and there's another book is kind of upsetting, to be honest, because I wanted like a happy ending and the conflict to be resolved in one book. Because of how long it is, I thought that would happen. But in the first half of the book, Kingfisher is so mean. Didn't like him as a character, but he really is just morally gray and kind of redeems himself through the rest of the book. And there were so many elements in this book, a lot of world building, but just kept it really, really interesting, and not just like telling you it, because I feel like some fantasy books definitely take a lot of time to tell you a lot of background information, but it felt very natural in Quicksilver how background information was like woven into the plot. An unexpected 5 stars, especially with how long it was. I did not think I would love it that much, but I did, and I never wanted the book to end. But in Quicksilver, it is about Ceres, and she has a power that humans should not have. So Kingfisher takes her to the Fae world, and they end up needing her to use her power to help them. That is like the very, very loose gist of the book. There is so much more. Then I ended up back-to-back reading Heartless Hunter and Rebel Witch. I gave both of them 5 stars, and I've talked about this so much in April. Basically, it's Rune, she's a witch, Gideon is a witch hunter, and they date each other for information in the first one, and then truth comes out, and in the second one, they're learning how to complete both of their own tasks, but they're around each other and old feelings come back up. I feel like this is the perfect duology, perfect happy ending. Honestly, would read a million other books with these characters, but I did feel like this duology was the perfect length and didn't drag out. I really liked how both characters had their own lives, and it wasn't like they spent all their time together in the first book. And even in the second book, they really had their own lives and their own opinions. After that, I ended up reading Curse of Shadows and Thorns by L.J. Andrews, which I gave 3 stars, but now that I think about it, I would probably bump it up to 4 stars. It is a series, and I did not stop thinking about the first book, so I had to start reading the second book. And these are very fast-paced and kind of shorter books. They're both, I think, around 300 pages, which for fantasy is kind of short, but there are, I think, a lot of books in the series. But so far, I am really loving the characters. Just the world, I feel like, is really interesting, and this book is on Kindle Unlimited, and it is a little bit hard to read because there are a few typos, and just the way the sentences are written, it can be kind of hard to follow at times. But that is the only problem I have with the book. It is about Elise, and she has a vow negotiator legion, and there is like a war going on between like the people and the royalty. Elise is not your typical princess. She finds some stuff out about Legion, and she has to decide what part of the war she's going to stand with. So I really, really like this book. I haven't heard anybody talk about it, but After that, I ended up reading Deep End by Ali Hazelwood, which I gave 4 stars. I liked it. I did think it was kind of overhyped, but I read it in one sitting because it is kind of addicting. You want to find out what happens. And it is kind of like unnecessarily dramatic, but it does keep you interested. So to me, I feel like I put romance and fantasy on very different rating systems because for the most part, romance just feels very lighthearted and fantasy is usually very high stakes. And I like fantasy more, so I feel like I rate it a lot harder versus romance. I feel like romance is just easier to read, and if it can keep me reading through multiple hours, that's a good sign, because fantasy, it can do that, but it's kind of a lot to absorb in one sitting. So it's usually I have to take a break from reading fantasy. But romance, I don't have that problem. But it is about Scarlett. She's a diver, and her friend sets her up with her ex-boyfriend Lucas, and there is just a lot of unnecessary drama because at first it is just a physical relationship, and then it becomes more than that, and then all of a sudden the friend just is not happy, which you can tell throughout the book. It was good. I feel like it was definitely overhyped because of the author Ali Hazelwood is talked about so frequently. I did like it a lot. It was pretty spicy, which I did know before going into it. Like the characters, like the plot, I did think the third act conflict could have just been very easily resolved. This was on my TBR. I read The Strawberry Patch Pancake House by Laurie Gilmore. 4 stars. It's about Archer and Iris. She is his nanny for his little girl, and he has suddenly become a single dad. Their relationship is honestly super cute, and I feel like the conflict was very, very realistic, and it wasn't just because of bad communication. I felt like it was actually a reasonable, realistic conflict, but I really did like this one, and perfect spring read. Then I read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. 4 stars again. This one, Addie, she is cursed for no one to remember her, and she also lives forever, so kind of a terrible combination in my opinion. But she meets someone who finally remembers her, and they get to spend a lot of time together. The first half I felt was super slow, but the second half really evolved, and the second half really made me like the book a lot more because of how much the plot changes from just being very repetitive in the first half. Then I did a reread of A Court of Wings and Ruin and gave it 5 stars again. She just becomes a lot more of a stronger character and stands up to people, and she is very secretive and plotting, and she just does a lot of stuff that I feel like first book Feyre would never do, even second book. So I really liked how she became a much smarter character almost, and just overall much more confident. This one is one of my favorites. The first 3 books of the ACOTAR series are honestly so good in my opinion, and I will always love these ones. I'm getting to the end, but I read Playboy Pilot and I gave it 2 stars because I was really not enjoying the 2 main characters. It is about a pilot and you could call her a socialite. The plot was super cute, but the characters I could not get behind. I feel like it was a little bit overdone. Overall, the entire book just was so unrealistic that all parts of it were completely unbelievable, and I did not like the 2 characters. So their dynamic was just not my favorite, and I especially did not like the male main character. The plot was super cute. I just think I would have liked it a lot more if it was executed a bit differently. And then we're finally at the end. The last book I read in April was Believe Me, which is the last novella in the final book in the Shatter Me series and I gave it 4 stars, but even though it was a novella, it was probably one of my favorite books in the whole series. I thought it was just so cute. I really loved how kind of wrapped up a little bit of not necessarily loose ends, but just problems that you could see arising in other books. It resolved those, and I just thought it was super cute. And I feel like throughout the whole series there were not a lot of cute moments, but finally believe me, we got very, very cute moments, which I really liked. And it gave all the characters, I feel like, a very, very happy ending. But I've been talking for forever, and so far this year I've read 35 books. I'm on track to finish my reading goal, which is 100 books, if I continue to read around 9 books a month. But I'm hoping to get a little bit ahead. We will see. So far I'm on track. And there were a bunch of books in the last 2 months that I did really end up liking. My camera ended up dying, but as I was saying, there were a lot of books I liked. A few I didn't, but I feel like I put myself out there a lot with books and read a ton of new ones. I think I'm gonna quit yapping because I've talked for so long, but I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts about the books I read in March and April, and thanks for watching. I hope to see you again real soon. Bye.